Welcome everyone to the Academy of the Impossible and our weekly campaign school, the purpose of which is to expand participation in the political process. We generally feel that politics is something that everyone should be privy to, whether it's running for public office, whether it's participating in punditry, or involved behind the scenes in terms of staffers. So we tend to invite in guests, whether elected officials or people with campaign experience, to share their experiences, to share their insights. We record it for YouTube so that people who aren't present are able to participate. But our format tends to be a conversation between myself and our guest, and then we open it up for group discussion. And it's really meant to be a respectful and cordial environment so that we can all learn how to make more of our involvement in politics as a whole. And I'm particularly interested in inviting Councillor Ainslie, in part because of the work that he's done in promoting open government at City Hall, and in really trying to advance the whole dialogue and discussion of citizen engagement, which I think certainly on the municipal level is very tangible, because municipal politics tends to be what affects people most. It tends to be what's local to them, and it's certainly, I think, from the perspective of elected office, also the most accessible, in the sense that the other reason I was interested in having you is that you did have a background at City Hall before you ran for elected office. And it's clear that that's really important in terms of allowing people to become familiar. So generally in terms of the conversations that we have, I like to really start at an early point in terms of, what was it that got you interested in politics? What was it that, got you to City Hall in the first place before you were running for office? Because often when people talk about apathy, it strikes me that it's not so much an issue of apathy, but one of access. It's when people decide, hey, this is important to me, I want to do more. So I'm curious where, for you, that story started.
Yeah, and it probably started right back, my wife and I had 3 young children, 12, 10, and our youngest son, 6. And probably right about where my oldest son is now, at age 12. And my mom used to do a lot of volunteering in the community. She used to go door knocking for Canadian Cancer Society, Heart and Stroke Foundation. We had a school right across the street. I was enrolled at age 6 in Beavers. I did the whole Beavers Cup Scouts program. And one of the things that they always teach you is to be involved in your community. And I think around the age of 10, 11, 12, they kind of all meshed together. And, my mom didn't like us sitting in front of the TV like most parents do now. So it's like, you know what, you can come out and knock on doors with me, and you can just stand there and be polite and learn how to do it. And Scouts, I always remember Cubs and Scouts, we had an environmental program. It was called Trees for Canada, where we had to plant X number of trees on a Saturday morning. But to do that, we had to go out and fundraise. So it was door-to-door knocking, talking to people. So I became much more aware of my community that way through, I guess, Scouts Canada, and kind of nudging along from my parents. And then at the daily dinner table, I had probably an interesting experience. My father was a staunch conservative. My mother was a staunch liberal. So there was a lot of political talk. Now can't ever remember it getting very heated, but certainly sitting at the dinner table, listening to them talk about politics at all different levels. Neither one of them ever was very heavily involved in a campaign. My dad said at one point, Paul Cosgrove, who's one of the mayors in Scarborough, my dad liked him enough to go and put signs up, but they never really actively got involved in campaigning, and I think I caught the bug there. I got involved in the Young Liberals, did a lot of volunteering, working on campaigns at all different levels.
And what was that like? Like, what were the types of tasks that you would do, sort of moving up the volunteer ranks, as it were?
Yeah.
And I'm curious if that then helped inform your knowledge of what it takes to run a successful campaign.
Yeah, and I started, right from, the age of 12, and Martin O'Connell was the federal MP in the area, running the variety store across the street, getting pop chips or whatever. Moving up from there to somebody took me to do some door knocking, helping with election signs. From there, I moved I became more liberal, probably to my father's chagrin than conservative. Joined the Young Liberals. I held a number of elected positions in the Young Liberals on the provincial executive. I was the regional coordinator at one point, which I looked after all the young Liberal groups in Toronto, from Yonge Street to the Pickering border.
And those are all little campaigns, aren't they?
Yep.
And each one of those, I mean, it's party members, but it's almost like it's a training ground for the type of canvassing, literally, that it requires to earn people's trust.
Yeah.
Was that something that you always was comfortable with?
I've always been very comfortable knocking on doors. My staff now even, it's funny because one of the things that I like to do as a city councillor is try and door knock at least an hour a week. And I was off because people will, I'll knock on their door. I've got a canvas card here that I use, or I've got 2 cards. This one's basically one I can pass around. I've got it's got some information on the front. It's got a newsletter on the back. This is my door knocker one that I do. So I go knock on doors for an hour a week. And the reaction from people is funny because they'll look at me and go, oh, Councillor, is there an election already? And I'll say, no, I'm just here I just want to talk to you, engage you, see what your issues are. If I'm doing a bad job, great. If I'm doing a good job, I want to hear that. But I'm just here to talk to you. And they'll be like, really, what's the catch? Well, there's no catch. I'm your city councillor. I'm here to talk to you, right? And it's always interesting the reaction I get back from that. But you know, it's something I'm very comfortable doing. I think that people need to be engaged that way because you know people are always very busy. You know, society seems to be busier and busier. You know, everybody's working in the house. You know, you don't always have time to go to a community meeting. So I'd rather go knock on their door and engage them.
And was that something you learned working at City Hall as a staffer, the role of constituency work and constituency relations?
It was actually started at City Hall. I worked at Queen's Park for a while, but in high school, I went to New McNeil High School at Victoria Park and Kingston Road, and I had one religion teacher. His name was Ted Schmidt, and his program was he liked us to get out in the community.
Yeah, I know Ted actually.
Oh, okay. And find out what's going on. And in grade 13, he had a list of things that we had to go out and do in the community, and some of them not too exciting. I wasn't too excited about. One though was to go meet with the local MP or MPP. The MPP at the time was Richard Johnson, who was at Queen's Park, MPP, and so he had monthly town hall meetings. So Ted sent us, my friend and I went off to his town hall meeting, and we sat in the local gymnasium, and all Richard was doing was advertising in a certain area in his riding. And they went to the school, he had bought a coffee and a plate of cookies and chairs, and just had them sit around. And you know, I thought that what a great idea, and that's actually something that stuck with me through my whole career. When I started working at Queen's Park in the late 1990s, and I tried to get the MPP I was working for to have town hall meetings, and she said, well, I see people at the grocery store on Saturdays. I don't need that level of interaction. And I was like, okay, fine. You know, if that's what you want to do, that's your business. But right from when I first got elected in 2006, that's something else I do as well. As I have a monthly town hall meeting. I've got my ward divided into 20 areas now, and I invite 800 houses. We drop a flyer. I put it on Facebook, Twitter, and I got the same reaction though with door knocking when I first started. People would sit back and they're almost sitting back looking at me like, why are we here? It's like, well, I want to hear from you. And they're very apprehensive at first. And I'd explain what's going on in Ward 43, what's going on in City Hall, and I say, okay, now the next hour and a half, I just want question and answers from my residents. And they'd all be sitting there like, what's wrong? Not wrong.
But it's good in terms of earning their trust through that kind of presence of just being there. And I assume, based on being reelected, that it works. But are you starting to find that it trickles down in terms of perhaps them getting more involved in the community as a whole and getting more interested in what happens at City Hall?
Yeah, I get I get about 40 or 50 people on a regular basis that come to it. They're much more involved in my community, like my constituency assistant even. She worked for the former councillor that was in the ward, David Signacki. She's gone right back. Her first job, she worked for Art Eggleton when he was the mayor of Toronto. And she said after I got elected, and we've got a database where we track all the calls and the emails, and we can chart with, you know, whether it's going up or down, and you know, you can see it over on an annual basis. We can track it, and it was going steadily increasing. It's kind of leveled off a bit now, but you know, it got to the point where we would have our monthly staff meeting, and she'd be like, "It just doesn't stop falling. It just keeps getting busier. Like, you know, either we need more staff, or you need to go out with us." And it's like, well, the reason I'm doing this is to engage residents, right? So we hired more staff, and you know, I found it an excellent way to engage people. When I ran in 2006, I got roughly 4,000 votes, and in 2010, when I was re-elected, I got just under 10,000 votes. Mm-hmm. So I think that really to me, it was validated that the engagement tools that I'm using are working. I think, you know, I'm very proud in my community when I do have my town hall meetings that 9 times out of 10 I can safely go in there and know throughout my ward that I've got a pretty fair grasp of, you know, the issues. I like to have, you know, say that I'm proactive if there's an issue in a community or an area, that I know about it before it explodes into or festers into a huge problem. Once in a while I get surprised. I had one of my town hall meetings in June a couple of years ago. I was averaging 30 or 40 people, and I drove into the school parking lot. I knew there was nothing else going on in the school, and the parking lot was full of cars. And then I went into the actual room, and there's 200 people in the room, and I was like, holy crap, what's gone wrong? And so I did my usual thing, you know, this is what's going on in Ward 43, this is what's going on in City Hall, and everybody was kind of looking at me, and then they asked a few questions, and I kept waiting for the other hand to drop, and finally I looked at everyone and I said, you know what, I said, I'm going to be perfectly honest, this is the largest attended town hall meeting I've had in the 5 years since I've been doing these.
What's up?
There's obviously a burning issue here. You know, what's going on? And people are still looking at me, and I said, you know what, I'm really thick-skinned, don't be shy. There's a community association in this area, I haven't heard anything, but fire away. If there's something I completely missed, get it off your chests and I'll solve it for you. And there's still nothing. And finally I said to people, so why are you here? And it was like the perfect storm. It was like the first week in June. The Jays weren't playing. The Leafs were out. People were saying, well, you know, American Idol wasn't on. There's no reality shows. And it was basically lots of people didn't have anything else to do that night. The weather wasn't that great. So we'll go to Councillor Ainslie's town hall. Nice. Perfect. Works for me.
Yeah. Which speaks to one of the common threads that we've seen in all of our guests is how important that human contact is. How important it is to allow the voter to get a sense of who you are, even if it's at a basic level. You know, that's what motivates them towards voting. Is that also in your experience that having that interaction is often what allows them to, as you say, decide to come to a town hall, let alone actually vote?
And I think the other bit of interaction I always find is that, you know, people see it as normal. Like, you're not somebody that just doesn't show up every 4 years and, you know, please vote for me. I get regular interaction with them. You know, to be quite honest, I live about 50 yards outside my ward. But, you know, I go to church in our ward. My mom still lives in the house where I grew up. I do the grocery shopping. So there's 3 or 4 grocery stores I'm in all the time. So people see me on a regular basis. I was actually, like yesterday morning, for example, I was in a Shoppers Drug Mart checking my lottery tickets, hoping I would come back to work tomorrow. And somebody came over to me and said, Councillor Ainslie? And I said, yeah. And he said, you know, I've got an issue with foxes in our neighborhood, you know, and this is the issue. How can we deal with it? And he said, I'm sorry to bother you. And it's like, it's no bother. It's, you know, that's what I'm here for. You know, I want to talk to people. You know, don't be afraid to walk up to me in the plaza at the grocery store and you know, tell me if you have a concern, or, you know, tell me I'm doing a great job. I've had that. But, you know, I think you have to have that interaction on a regular basis. I think people are comfortable with you. They understand that you know their concerns. And once again, you're not just showing up at election time on their doorstep and saying, you know, I've worked hard for you for the past 4 years, although you've never seen me except on TV, or you see my name once in a while in the Scarborough Mirror, and, you know, here's my platform, please vote for me.
Well, and how much of it is a balance in terms of, you know, the work of a city councillor between governing the city, stuff like the zoo, stuff like the different committees you sit on, and constituency work, and making sure that the people you represent are able to deal with their issues, whether in relation to City Hall or just in relation to their lives. I mean, I would assume it's a little bit of a balance in that you have to be an effective councillor, but you also have to be an effective representative. How do you deal with the two of those in terms of also allowing yourself to have a life?
And we have 3 young kids too, right? So it's trying to find that balance. Like for myself, as I said, like we've got 3 kids all involved with Scouts Canada. So Wednesday night's family night, and sometimes family night consists of, my wife or I, we stop at Burger King or McDonald's and grab dinner for the kids. We have a quick meal and then we're off to Cubs and Beavers and Cubs on Wednesday nights. But on the flip side too, it's having good staff. Like I've got great staff. My executive assistant, we worked together when I was in Queens Park back in 1999. I've had my admin assistant since 2006 when he just walked in the door. And he said to me, "Oh, Councillor, I've looked at your website. It's pretty crappy. I'm pretty good with websites. I'd like to just come and volunteer." And he volunteered at my office for about 8 months. And I found some money and hired him, and he worked part-time for me, and then morphed into my admin assistant. Still looks after my website. Now I think I have an amazing website, but and it's having your staff too say, "You know what? You're spending too much time in City Hall. There's 60,000 people in your ward that you need to look after. They don't all vote for you, but you need to spend a little more time in your ward," and that's where we have the regularly scheduled door knocking, the town hall meeting. I also do meet and greet, where I've got a little table, not much bigger than this, and I just plop down in a plaza and load it up with city brochures, and I've got an A-frame sign, and I'll just stand there for 2 hours and hand out my canvassing card and make sure people know how to find me, and it's great. One of the other things I do as well that TCHC wasn't too happy with me. I've got a number of TCHC buildings in my ward. I decided to do meet and greets in the lobbies. When I first started doing them, I notified TCHC, so I'm coming to this building. We would drop flyers everywhere in the building, and I'd set up my handy-dandy table the next day, and lo and behold, somebody from TCHC would show up, and they would stand there for the entire 2 hours with me.
Because they'd be worried about people would say.
And a resident would come by and they would stand there and listen with rapt attention to everything the resident had to say. Or the resident would come down and start to talk to me and then look at the person and realize they were from TCHC and just like, holy cow, look at the time.
Yeah.
Great to meet you, Councillor, but I gotta go.
Yeah.
So now I drop the flyers, set up in the building, and try and kick me out. I'm the city councillor. We run you. I'm not going anywhere, right?
Well, you're an avenue for the residents to talk about their experience.
Yeah, and the residents are much more comfortable knowing that I'm there without somebody from TCHC, because I had comments where people would say, we think you're fronting for the TCHC. Like, I'm only fronting for myself, right? It's
well, that kind of cynicism is rather pervasive amongst many people, and it's interesting also the thread in terms of the relationship with your staffers and the trust that's required for that to be effective. Many of our guests have talked about how their volunteer experience in campaigns was invaluable in terms of then informing their ability to run a campaign. It almost sounds like there was a parallel with your experience being a staffer, and your experience understanding the organizational needs of the candidate and the elected official has helped you then build a team and operate in a way that balances all these needs so that you can be comfortable and be yourself and be an effective councillor at the same time.
And doing both, I think, as you said, it helps me understand the role that staff play. And so, I've been there and I noticed, like, I've worked for some great politicians and I've worked for some pretty lousy politicians. So, I understand what staff go through, but I also, on the flip side, will come back on them and say, this is what I expect of you to keep me on my toes. So they understand that as well. I worked for, the last councillor I worked for, he was the budget chair. And there was times where he had a choice between going to a budget meeting or something in the ward. And I would just look at him and say, you know what? nobody's voting for you at City Hall. The votes are back there in the board. And the other line I used to use once in a while if I thought I was going to get a bad reaction was I would preface my comments to him with, you know, I get paid to give you advice. You don't have to listen to my advice. You don't have to follow it. As long as my check cashes every 2 weeks, that's all I care about. So, but here's what you need to be doing, right? And we built up a good rapport that way. But it's also, you know, from my own experience as well. This is my second term. My first term in office, I wasn't chairing any committees. I was on my outs for probably the last part of the term. Mayor Miller and I weren't getting along very well, so I didn't have a lot of responsibilities at City Hall. So I was able to spend a lot more time in my ward. We have a priority neighborhood in my ward, Kings Road, Galloway, Orton Park, which always needs a lot of work. We have an amazing community hub called the Cardinal Storefront with a number of different subcommittees. I was able to spend a lot of time in my ward, and now, you know, with all the responsibilities I have at City Hall, it's working very hard to find that balance between City Hall and not spending too much time at City Hall, being in my ward, because once in a while I do get comments about, oh, you know, how are you doing, Paul? We haven't seen you for a while. You know, in your first term, you were here all the time.
That's a different set of expectations.
Yeah.
That can create.
And it's, but it's at the same time trying to explain to people, you know, I'm still here. My staff are here. You know, if I can't go, I try to step my staff to, you know, one of the committee meetings, or if they're doing a local town hall meeting or community speaks, I make sure that somebody's there. But at the same time, you know, also trying to work at city building, because I've been doing a number of different initiatives through government management and also on my own, that while they help my residents, also I hope I can help residents right across Toronto as well. So it's...
Well, and I absolutely want to talk about those initiatives, because it was certainly part of the reason that we asked you here. But I'm curious still on this level, that for me is one half literacy, of knowing sort of how to operate at City Hall and how to engage with constituents, but also one part kind of more broadly skill set, that it sounds both in terms of your scout experience, in terms of staffing, and in terms of in public office, that proximity is important, both in terms of being present in the community and present with the other politicians who you're able to learn from in the campaigns. I mean, would you advise someone who was considering about a life in public office to spend as much time as possible around the public office itself, whether sitting in the gallery, whether volunteering for a campaign, whether working as a staffer? Do you believe that it's an excellent gateway into this particular field of work?
I think if I want to do it all over again, there's not much I wouldn't change. I think that, you know, volunteering in election campaigns is an excellent way to learn about your community, to learn about issues, to meet politicians at all different levels, you know, to meet other people that, because, you know, even in the 21st century of Twitter and social media, you still need volunteers, you know, and the only way you're going to meet other people that are going to be really interested in helping you is to be involved in your community, whether it's, you know, going out knocking on doors for the Canadian Cancer Society, helping, you know, with the local food bank or food drive. I think one of the, you know, whether it's being involved in a community association, whether you join one or, you know, start one in your own community that you live in, you need to build that base if you're going to run for public office. You know, you need to be knowledgeable of what's going on in the community, but you also have to be engaged in the community, so that people are going to come out and say, you know what, he's worked very hard, whether it's the food bank or marathon or, you know, volunteering at the library, community association, being engaged in your community. I think going and sitting at City Hall, listening to the City Council, probably not top of mind for me if I was, you know, before I got elected, you know, I worked for a city councillor, but, you know, sitting through 12 hours of debate at City Hall is probably not a worthwhile.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because there is sometimes a myth that you need to engage in what might be valuable for some if they're getting paid to be at City Hall for 12 hours.
Yeah.
But if you're not, there might be, as you say, community activity that would be far more rewarding vis-a-vis building that political ways. Which then leads me to another question, which I do tend to ask repeatedly at these events, because it certainly from my perspective, I'm curious what it takes to maintain that motivation amongst volunteers. That if you have a campaign, especially given that city campaigns run very long, I mean, it's not like provincial or federal where it's a pretty tight framed race. City elections now go on for months. I mean, January 1st is often when many campaigns begin. Yeah. How do you get those volunteers who agreed it's probably community engagement that got them motivated in the first place? But now that they're part of the team, I mean, are you willing to share any of the secrets or tips on day after day how to get them to keep coming back?
Yeah. And I guess the one thing that for a municipal election, I think that starting campaigning in January and going, all out for a year, because you're expecting people to come out and knock on doors with you and give up their evenings and weekends. And I think campaigning on January 5th, I think, to be quite honest, is a waste of time.
Yeah.
Right?
I think you could burn out that support.
Well, I really don't think, people's lives are so busy now between, if you have children or, if there's two parents in the household, they're both working, parents are working all the time. You're taking your kids to hockey and baseball, computer clubs, just trying to get them to the local community center, keeping them busy. Everybody has busy lives, and I really don't see that level of engagement in the municipal election until Labor Day. Right? Like my last two campaigns, I started September, like the day after Labor Day. One of the problems that you have now is, for example, I have 60,000 residents in my ward. John Fillion, for example, in North York, I think it's up to about 110,000 people. There's the low end down on the Danforth. I think Mary Fragedakis says 30,000. But take my ward of 60,000, I started the day after Labor Day. I had I tried to go out every night with 2 or 3 people during the afternoon as well. I started at 9 in the morning. I usually stopped at 8 o'clock at night because after that people just don't answer their doors. It gets darker that time of year, so people aren't answering their doors. But it's really, until Labor Day with the municipal election, people really don't kick into the issues. And I just find that spending all that time from January on, fruitless, I would say.
And if you're already doing the town halls, if you're already present in the community, that gives them that sense of proximity and access. Yep. So that, as you're right, when they tune into the campaign, that's when it makes sense to mobilize those resources and keep those volunteers engaged.
Yeah. I think the quandary though is for somebody trying to take out an incumbent, for lack of a better word. It's how do you manage your resources, and that's where I think you need to be involved in the community association. You need to find different things that you can be involved in the community that help you raise your profile, so that you're not just showing up on somebody's doorstep and saying, these are the issues I have, and this is why I want to be your city councillor. The last election, I had 5 people running against me. 4 of them lived nowhere near the ward. Right? One lived in Etobicoke, one was up in North York, one lived on the Danforth somewhere. We had a couple of community meetings, all candidates meetings, and where somebody would ask a question very specifically about, this is the issue in our neighborhood, how are you going to deal with that? And I remember like it was yesterday, the one meeting, and I have only had 3 out of the other 5 people running against me at this all candidates meeting, and one after another, they looked down the table and said, well, you have to ask Councillor Ainslie because I'm not familiar with that area of the ward. And I'm like, well, why are you running against me? Right? I don't mind you running. If you're going to come all the way from Etobicoke to run in Scarborough, that's your business. I'm not going to fault you for it. I could do the reverse, but at least have some idea of what's going on in the ward.
Well, and I think you touched upon 2 interesting points. One, the power of incumbency. That often, it makes sense to sometimes run in a contest in which there isn't an incumbent, because they tend to be the most competitive. And I think at the same time underscore that if that's going to happen, it has as a prerequisite that you're already engaged in that community, that you already understand the needs of that community. I mean, can you describe perhaps, and this sort of segues into your work on the Government Management Committee and some of the initiatives you're introducing, could you imagine perhaps just for hypothetical sake, given how mobile we are in the city now, usually now people don't work where they live, that they are rooted in multiple communities in the city. Can you imagine a city hall that both A, addresses what you were getting at in how wards often have varying degrees of population and other different challenges? You know, is there a future perhaps for the way we used to have Metro Council? As I'm not at all in any way calling for a second tier of government, but sort of councillors at large or councillors without portfolio. Is there a way in which City Council, maybe not even with more councillors, address the fact that Toronto is diverse in its definition of community? That, I mean, for myself, I identify often with North Etobicoke as much as I do downtown, because so many of my friends and some of my family are there. You know, is there a way for City Council to address that diversification of geography that the city's currently going through?
And very interesting question. And it actually leads into something that I'm pushing for City Council, and actually moved through our executive committee, was to look at the number of wards. Because we all get the same budget, we all have the same number of staff. So if I have somebody, it's funny because on paper we're all supposed to have about 60,000 people. John Fillion, as I just said, has 110,000. Mary Fragedaka says, I think 29 or 30. Marie Ajamari is somewhere around the same amount. So we can't all do the same thing with the same amount of money, and we have the same debate over our office budgets, which we just cut down from 50,000 to 30,000. And John Fillion right away is like, well, how am I going to get a newsletter out to everybody, right? But one of the things that I just put through our executive committee was a process where we do examine the number of wards that we have in the city. And right away, one of my colleagues, Giorgio Mamboliti, said, too many, we got to cut it in half. The mayor, on his platform, he said, we need half as many wards as we do now. But it's a very interesting process that we're about to go through. Whereas traditionally, or what we're used to at City Hall, is we put something in place and say, this is the goal at the end. We're at point A, our goal is to get to point B, whether it's 22 wards, we're going from A to B. Our ultimate objective is to mold and sculpt everything to get to 22. When the provincial legislation dictates that we have to have a series of community meetings across the city, we have to engage our residents, and only at the end of the process do you decide how many wards you're going to have. So you don't come up with a number until you get to the end. So I said to somebody, we could actually come up with 88 city councillors. We could come up with something that completely turns upside down how community councils work. One of the things that I want to look into more is the whole structure in terms of that as well. We have community councils, but New York City, for example, has planning councils. They have, I think it's 68 planning councils across the city, where they bring in communities and they decide what the avenue study is going to look like, or what the zoning should be allowed for Kingston Road. And it's not all left up to the politicians. It's really engaging the community, coming back and telling the city councillors, this is what we want our community to look like. And we're about to engage in this process. It's actually going to take a couple of years, because we have had comments about maybe the ward boundaries should be shaped not across, like my ward is Lake Ontario on the south, Morningside Avenue up to the 401, goes across to Scarborough Golf Club Road and back down to Lake Ontario. And it's it was, look at the map, 60,000 people, how do we get 60,000 people in the box? Well, maybe, it cuts across West Hill. It's a community where I live in. Morningside Avenue runs right up the middle of it. And Seven Oaks on the north end, the 401 cuts across it. So, instead of looking at neighborhoods, we look at neighborhoods instead of streets to define how a ward looks like. And the boundaries, or not the boundaries, the population sizes of the wards haven't really changed since 1996. So 15 years, we're probably going to spend another 2 years deciding the process and the boundaries, right? So the city's going to, you know, increase in population by that much more. You know, Port John Fillion could end up with 130,000 people by the time we're done, have a ward twice the size of mine. But I think, you know, we really need to spend a lot more time in City Hall thinking outside the box and not just, this is, you know, we've been doing it this way for 50 years, you can do it this way for the next 50 years, right? It's just not, I don't think it's going to work.
Well, and that's what I think makes the chair of the Government Management Committee such an interesting position, because it allows you both to think about the role of government, the business of government, explicitly in the age of the iPad, in the age of the internet. And that's partly how we met, but it's also, again, why we asked you here. It's interesting in that I think it speaks to a lot of young people, part of their disconnect from politics, that so much of the structure, so much of the way things are done is from an era that they don't have a reference to. So it strikes me as important, if you want to engage citizens, if you want to make it easy, that there is a certain technological reconfiguration of the way that City Hall is run. So I'm curious if you could elaborate a bit on some of the work and some of the initiatives that you've been doing to try to make City Hall more accessible, and not just in terms of citizens, but even I suspect in terms of staff and the people at City Hall, in terms of the technology that's available to them.
And I've had my good moments and bad moments with it. When I was, you know, the mayor's chief of staff, the mayor, after the last election, asked me if I'd chair the Government Management Committee, and I laughed. I said to his chief of staff at the time, I said, you know, I'm going to drag the city kicking and screaming into the 21st century. And it goes right back to 2006 when I was first elected, and I was on the Works Committee. And we were one of the items we were discussing were these little, I forget the name of the bike, but it's like a little motorized motorcycle. And we were trying to come up with a noise bylaw for them and how to license them. And I was sitting in the committee room, and I had my laptop, and it was going the traditional road of, we'll ask staff for a report, we'll come back on how we're doing, and we'll look at other jurisdictions. And while I sat there, I Googled the bike plus bylaw, and I came up with a bylaw from Los Angeles. And I went in the City of Los Angeles website, and I cut and copied it into a Word document, and then I used the Word function to replace City of Los Angeles with Toronto in about less than 30 seconds. And then I emailed it to the clerk on the other side of the room, and I started speaking, and I said, Shelley Carroll was the chair of the committee, and I said, I have a motion I'd like to put up on the screen, and I started to speak to it, and then somebody said, well, wait a second, that's a bylaw. We want a report, not a bylaw. And I said, well, there's your bylaw. I said, why reinvent the wheel? And the councillor who was sitting beside me, who shall remain nameless, is retired now, but he looked at me and was like, wow, how'd you do that, councillor? And I said, well, I used the internet and email, and it's all right here, and there's your bylaw. I just saved thousands of dollars. Yeah. And he looked at me and he said, he goes, wow, this is the internet, eh? He goes, I don't even use email. And I was like, great, well, you know, I'm going to explain to you how to use email. And, but, you know, flash forward 5 years with government management, and I've been doing a lot of work in the community to engage residents, and then so I kind of, you know, widened the lens, like I had a camera and said, you know, how can I do this at City Hall? And it started, you know, walking right in the door of City Hall. There's no sign that says council chamber this way, committee rooms on the second floor, you know, what do the committees do? There's nothing that explains. We have 7 standing committees, you know, government management. When I was appointed to that and it was announced in the paper, I had friends calling me and saying, congratulations, you're chair of the Government Management Committee, you're on the executive. What the hell are you doing? What the hell is government management? What does that mean? And people are more politically attuned. I had one friend in particular that called me, was like, wow, congratulations, you're the chair of government management. You're running the city. And, but you know, for the
somewhere in between.
Yeah, but for the vast majority of people, government management, what is that? But to walk into City Hall, you have no idea where the council chambers are, which is the whole reason I was elected. You know, the basis of being a city councilor was to get to the city council chambers so I could vote on things to make the city run better. At least that's what I like to think. So, you know, as a member of the public, you can't even find the council chambers. You have no idea where the committee rooms are. So, you know, something as basic as better signage in the Toronto, you know, City Hall and all the civic centers. One of the other things that kind of flustered people was we actually have an Office of Civic Engagement, which is, you will find it on the 9th floor of the East Tower, behind a glass door that you need a pass to get to. And if you went to the lobby on the 9th floor, there's no sign that says call, there's no receptionist there to begin with. So there's no phone number for you to call to get to the Office of Civic Engagement. And what they do in the Office of Civic Engagement is they train other staff to go out and interact with the general public. There's no real civic engagement office to engage the general public. So one of the things that I've also looked at doing is we have cubby holes. When I first got to City Hall, we had a souvenir shop. And it's long gone, it's sitting there empty across from Cafe on the Square. And I said, perfect, the Office of Civic Engagement can go there so you can understand how the different standing committees work. If you want to start a community association or a BIA, you know, this is the office you will go to so that you can actually understand how City Hall works and go there if you want to interact with City Hall. You know, for example, my kids, if they came to City Hall, our protocol office would give them a tour around City Hall, take them into the basement, into this pretty white painted room with a bunch of chairs, and they put a overhead up on the wall PowerPoint, and they give you a quick rundown on how City Hall works. Well, there's other municipalities, they actually have the class in, and they put them in a classroom setting, and they run them through, this is how City Hall works, and this is what it does, and this is how you can be engaged in City Hall, instead of just bringing them into City Council, bringing them into the basement, can run them up to City Hall, or City Council if it's running, see us in all our glory, which sometimes I call, you know, the world's largest kindergarten, and they'll introduce that class and say, you know, this is, you know, St. Martin de Porres from Councillor Ainslie's ward, and I'll laugh and I'll say, oh, there's another 40 kids that are never going to get involved in municipal politics. Right?
Although at the same time, it is interesting how there has been a renewal of interest around City Hall for whatever reason.
Well, the mayor.
Yes, but I think that it is an opportunity for people to take to get engaged, to actually get more involved. So I think certainly to wrap up my conversation and to open it up to those present, I'm curious what you think of the journalism, the media coverage, which is another sort of question we tend to throw at our guests. I mean, we obviously live in an era where anyone can be a journalist, where anyone with a Twitter account can sit in the City Hall gallery and add their own 2 cents. You know, we've had some of our guests be very encouraging about that. We've had others be critical. You're a very active Twitter user, which is certainly refreshing in terms of what we're talking about presence and proximity. That you're not just present in your community, you're present on social media, which I think has its own credibility and authenticity. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts around the way that social media is used at City Hall and the way in which journalism is perhaps more accessible, but at the same time perhaps more volatile in terms of the types of stories that end up getting written and end up getting attention?
Well, and it's, you know, I think I'm the most active city councillor on Twitter. I got in early. I think I got in probably before any of my colleagues. And I encourage all of them to use it, because as the comment I said earlier where, you know, one of my colleagues wasn't even quite sure how email worked. And it's still interesting. Some of my colleagues, when you talk about Facebook or Twitter, they're quite honest about it. They're like, waste of time. Why do I need to tell people what I'm doing all the time? And I said, well, you know, you have to be smart about it. I said, I'm not waking up in the morning and saying, good morning, Toronto, I'm having Kellogg's Cake for breakfast, or I'm putting blueberries on my cashy. I certainly don't think that people care what the heck I'm eating for breakfast, right? I think that, before I came here, I said, you know what, I'm going to the campaign school at the Academy of the Impossible. And, you know, I'm at 231 Wallace Avenue. I think things like that people are interested in, or a link to a news story, or I find iPads, for example, very useful for getting my message about community events. When I look at, if I have a town hall meeting that I would send 800 flyers to, because I've got a budget I gotta watch, I can tweet that out, or I can send out something on Facebook that goes to 3,000 people, and I actually get people from outside my ward now that come to some of my town hall meetings because they sit on Twitter, Facebook. Once in a while I get a more enlivened discussion when I'm going through what's going on at City Hall. But I think they're both very important tools in the 21st century to be used, and that goes right along with YouTube, LinkedIn, which is more of a business-oriented social media tool. But I think to try and be a politician in the 21st century without using social media, you're doing so at your peril. I don't think it's as advanced as it is in the United States, but we're certainly going down that path, right? And I think if you want to run for office, it's good to have that social media profile as well. When you look at journalism as a whole, my staff and I, we get frustrated once in a while because I will be working on something. For me, the perfect example, last summer, through all my tweeting and Facebooking, I found in Sweden, they have people that are on welfare. They have a similar welfare system than we do here, but instead of getting a check every month, they have a debit card, and the debit card's reloadable. There's no check going out, the envelopes don't get stuffed, there's no worries about constantly checking. Yeah, all that paperwork. And I brought it forward to government management, and my staff were very reluctant at first to even look at it because they didn't think it was worthwhile. And when we really got into the nuts and bolts of it and looked at how it worked, they came back and they said, "Councillor, the first year we're going to save $5 million. And the second year we'll save 7, and the third year they figured 9. And then they said, and the great thing about it as well is if you're on housing, for example, trying to get housing in Toronto, instead of calling a caseworker, you can use your card, log into a website, and look at all the waiting lists across Toronto and rejig your name on a waiting list. So one debit card, unlimited capabilities, even Sweden's even marching further ahead of that. And so I'm very excited, government management, and at the end of the meeting, I'm standing there, I'm waiting to tell my story about we just saved $5 million. And Councillor Ford goes out the other door, and they asked him about something, and the topic happened to be, do you know who Margaret Atwood is?
Oh, God.
And Councillor Ford,
there's the news cycle.
Right? But that was the news cycle. And, I'd say, my committee as a whole, and Councillor Ford's on that committee, we just say, 1 year, $5 million doesn't happen very often. And, that's, almost close to 1% of, our property tax. Mm-hmm. What we levy in property taxes, a great news story, but the whole story for the next 3 days was Margaret Atwood. And it was only 2 months later, end of August, and I wasn't doing much, and I was actually at the door knocking, and I get a call from a reporter on CTV. And she says to me, "Can you tell me about this debit card that the government management committee just passed?" And I said, "Well, we just didn't pass it. It was 2 months ago."
Yeah.
But it took the news cycle 2 months to catch up to, right? And, I went back to the office that day, and it was all about Margaret Atwood and Doug Ford. And, on an aside, I thank Councillor Ford for that, because it brought a lot of attention to the Toronto Public Library, which, as the chair, I'm happy to say it's the highest per capita used library system in North America. We would have had to pay a lot of money for that free advertising we got because of Margaret's comment about Margaret Atwood. But it also goes back to how journalism is now. And when I first got into politics, and you can see it morphing over the 15 years since I've worked at Queen's Park, where it's almost solely become making money. It's not to disseminate information and get the information out there. It's how can we make money to sell a newspaper. And earlier in the week we had the incident at Mayor Ford's residence, where right or wrong the reporters behind the house. But the next day, You know, there's a map on the front page of the Toronto Star. How can we get to Mayor Ford's house? Well, there's a map right there. And not only do you know where Mayor Ford lives now, you know the whole layout of the property around Mayor Ford's house. Well, you know, I was kind of flabbergasted to see that on the front page of the Toronto Star, but that's what they chose to do. But it's frustrating because, as I said, $5 million debit card. There's been a number of other instances I can point to where my staff will send out a media release. We will phone the reporters till we're almost blue in the face, trying to get some media interest in something, and just nothing.
Well, and I guess for one final question, I want to tie the threads of both A, the social media use, B, the relationship you have with your staff, and as you inferred, at least one of them is web savviness or technology savviness, and whether they're able, and the kind of escalating or inflationary dynamics of media today, right, that it often does sort of for needs to get attention, get out of control. Do your staff ever push back and say, "Councillor, don't tweet that," or "Councillor, you're getting it way"? I mean, you know, I'm just curious from a personal perspective, if in the social media era, the staffer has to be that kind of role of moderator for the elected official who, as a human being, may get carried away with what it is they're going to say. I know I certainly would, and would love to have a staffer who could stop me before I went too far.
And I've got great staff. It's, as I've said before, when we're talking about legislation I want to do, they're more apt to say, you know, this is, you know, maybe we should, better use of our time is to go do this instead. When it comes to my social media, in particular Twitter, I've got my iPad here, I've got my phone in my pocket, or BlackBerry. Jim Bazilli will be much happy to hear that. But you know, the tweets are my own. I know there's some politicians, and I'm actually quite surprised that some politicians, I know it's not them doing the tweets, because I'll read what's been posted and I'll tweet back to them. And I won't hear anything from them, and I'll run into them a couple of days later, or I'll be in an event or something, and I'll say, you know, that was an interesting tweet that you put up about so-and-so. And they just have a blank look on their face. And it's like, okay, you know what? I know you didn't tweet that. And I have had, you know, I've had an interesting time in a number of occasions where I tweeted something that's been controversial, or I thought was non-controversial. For example, once again, going back to the library, where we decided as a board a couple of years ago to close the Urban Affairs branch at Metro Hall because we didn't really see it as a board. We didn't see it as an active branch. It wasn't one that had a full range of programming, which you can see in a number of branches. It was basically a miniature reference library that, because of at one point in time didn't have enough library space in the downtown core, so it got add-ons such as you could pick up your books there. We put more computers into it. But I joked, you know, if you wanted to read the last 20 years of Ontario firefighter chief, you could go to the Urban Affairs branch at Metro Hall. So we decided, in terms of usage and money, to close it down, move it up to the reference library at Yonge Bloor, where you could actually have longer hours, better staff, and more availability to the material that was there than you would have at the Urban Affairs branch. But at one point, I ended up in quite an animated discussion with 4 or 5 people on Twitter about, you know, what was I thinking when I closed the library branch, and we got into this huge debate. And you know, trying Twitter, you have to do it in, your post has to be in 140 characters or less. Which for a politician can be quite some difficulty. You can face some difficulties at different times. But here I was, you know, in a discussion argument with 5 different people, and then I started to see crossover between the 5, and then so, you know, I started looking up their tweets and quickly came to the realization these 5 people were actually, it was a coordinated effort to go after Councillor Ainslie on Twitter. And so finally I said, you know, I don't have all day to do this. So I threw back at all 5 of them. Here's my email address for my office. I will happily sit down with all 5 of you and have a cup of coffee and just contact Alex in my office at this email address or this phone number. I'll be more than happy to, you know, sit down with all 5 of you. I never heard from them again. And I was like, okay, so, you know, what was the point of that?
Well, and I think there is a gaming tendency to social media that you're correct in grounding it back into the real world. And, you know, I'm happy to be accessible, happy to have a conversation. Let's take it to a format that's much more conducive, you know, to a long form than a short form. And that's part of why we formed the Academy, because we were rather ourselves frustrated with the very short form communication. So I can, as I'm sure you can tell, continue to chat with the council all day. So it's a good sign to open it up. Seb is one of our active members and helps us produce our podcast, and is first up with a question and or comment. If you don't have a question, feel encouraged to add your own 2 cents to today's discussion. But Seb, why don't you start?
Well, first of all, thank you for coming. It's been really useful so far. I think one of the reasons we wanted to have you here is because you are so, number one, you're sort of pro-public engagement, and number two, because you, frankly, are one of the few sort of councillors on the right that uses social media, you know, pervasively. And one of the things that has come up throughout all of these sessions is sort of an attempt to strike a balance between using these social media tools, but at the same time realizing that there's huge swaths of the population that don't have access to these tools. Right? And I think you know, the town halls and that is definitely a good example of something that you're doing to, you know, be able to accommodate both the tech-savvy community and also the community that, you know, for either reasons of literacy or income just isn't on board yet. What I'm wondering is, what do you think the solution is to that problem? How do you think that you take people who either don't have the means or the knowledge to use technology, and how do you bring them into the conversation digitally?
To bring them into the conversation digitally?
Yeah, because normally people say libraries, but is that the answer?
Yeah, and well, I'm a strong supporter of that. Actually, with the public library board, somebody said to me, you know, you have way too many computers. Like, you got to get rid of your computers. And the comment was, you know, everybody can go out buy a computer for $200. You know, why do they need to go to the library? And I said, quite simply because, sure, you know, maybe hypothetically everybody can go buy a laptop for $200 or, you know, an iPad or a tablet or whatever, but you still need to pay the fee. You know, you got to pay Rogers or TELUS or Win Mobile. Somebody, you know, it's the only way you're getting to the internet, and not everybody can afford that. And I think, you know, as a society, we need to recognize that. And that's why, you know, there's some days I don't think we have enough computers in our library branches. I think we should have a lot more. But as a politician, that's something I struggle with all the time. Even I know that not everybody has the fastest internet connection, so if you go to my website, it's a very plain text. I try not to put a lot of pictures on it. I don't want somebody, you know, taking forever to upload their website, so I don't have, you know, Canada playing when you log into my website. But I think you still need to recognize that there's a large portion of the population that A, can't afford internet access, and B, probably doesn't want to use it. You know, a perfect example is my own mother, who you know, uses email, gets on the internet once in a while, watches the news, but I know that she's not checking blogs or Twitter or Facebook to interact with people. And so, you know, that's where the door knocking comes in, the town hall meetings. I still send out a hard copy newsletter twice a year, but I also have an email newsletter that I send out every month. It goes out to about 5,000 homes now in my ward. But even that, when I ask people, the card I just passed around, you can sign up for my e-news on that just by contacting my office. But I also throw out to people, you know, if you don't have email, I'm more than happy to mail you a copy of my email newsletter, because I want to make sure you're engaged. But yeah, it's hard finding that balance, because some people are very tech savvy, as you're saying, like podcasts. And that's another perfect example for me at the city end, when I first brought up the idea of a podcast. You're not doing podcasts. Podcasts is an excellent example to engage people on the City of Toronto website. And I said, you know, Edmonton, I think, is the example I used, that they run a 5-minute podcast. And my staff came back to me and said, Councillor, to do a 5-minute podcast, it'll take us 30 hours. I was like, 30 hours? I said, you know, our oldest son's in grade 7, who a few weeks ago came to me and he needed my email address to log onto a website. And I was like, okay, well, this is going to be interesting. And I go see what website we need Dad's email address to log into. And his homework assignment was to log into this website, FlixTime, I think, and to do a public service announcement. So my grade 7 son had to do a 1-minute public service announcement. And I said to him, so how long is this going to take you? And he said, well, we did one yesterday in 10 minutes. And he said, my homework assignment tonight is I have to do another one. So he said, you know, at the most, Dad, I'll be done in half an hour. So I said, so...
Maybe City Hall should hire some teachers.
Right, I was like, so a 5-minute podcast, my son could probably do in a couple of hours, and he's in grade 7. Why should it take staff 30 hours? So obviously there's some type of disconnect at City Hall that they're not used to doing them, that maybe they need some retraining to do podcasts. And actually we ended up in a public-private partnership, for a lack of a better word, where Rogers is going to be doing our podcasts for us at no charge. And I would assume probably rather quickly.
Other questions?
So I know right now in the government management committee, you guys are going through some, investigating some different processes like runoffs and voting on weekend, I think, and some other things.
Yes.
So with all that, A, do you think the next 2014 elections are going to look a lot differently, or is it something that's probably going to happen for another election cycle? And B, do you think having these things will actually increase voter turnout for municipal election, which is rather low compared to the other levels of government?
Because I guess one of the things I would like to see with election turnout is they would say, you know, if you have a hotly contested mayoralty election, more people will come out. Well, that's great if you're coming out to vote for mayor, but what about the city councillor, right? I like to think that a large number of votes that I receive isn't to be because, you know, my name happens to be first on the ballot. But I think we really need to be looking at how we engage people. The last week when I was in the TCHC meeting, or my town hall meeting in the TCHC building, in 2006 they had a polling station in the lobby. And because there weren't enough people going down and voting, they merged 4 or 5 buildings into one and moved it down the street. So once again, going back to, if you have a very busy lifestyle, you're running to work, or you got to get your kids, you don't have time to vote, you go to the polling station to rush in and vote, there's 40 people lined up in front of you. The odds are you're going to turn around and say, well, you know, so-and-so is probably going to win anyway, so I'm not going to vote. I really think that we need to be looking at as many opportunities as possible to legally make it possible without, you know, intent of fraud for people to vote. And whether that's polling stations in every building or having elections on weekends. I know in Vancouver, their last municipal election, they ran it on a Saturday, Sunday, and I got some pushback from city staff that it might not be, it didn't really increase voter turnout all that much, but I think it's certainly something that we need to be looking at, whether, and you know, maybe we need to be looking at online voting. You know, kind of following along your other lines of accessibility. If you went to our City of Toronto website in the last election, you would look up Paul Ainslie in Ward 43, and you would see Paul Ainslie, Ward 43, my picture. If you went to the City of Vancouver's website, if I was running in there, you would see Paul Ainslie, Ward 43, his campaign phone number, email, office of his campaign office if I had one, and the link to my website, which I think is much more conducive to people trying to be engaged in the democratic process than the website that we had. So, and going back to your original comment about, will we see changes or have to wait? My goal is I want to, starting in 2014, starting to put as many different tools in place to engage people, to bring up our level of voter participation. I'm not a big fan, I think as I alluded to earlier, writing a report so I can send it to committee to be debated ad nauseum, to go to city council to be redebated. I'm not a big fan of that. I would rather direct staff, this is what I want you to do, and do it. Right? And then they can come back to me after the election and say, you know, We tried polling stations in every building, and this is how we advertised. It didn't work that well. You know, we tried Saturday and Sunday. It went up 5%. We recommend to go back to, you know, the traditional Monday. But I think, you know, going back to my earlier comment, that just because you did something for 100 years doesn't mean you need to do it for the next 100 years. And, you know, a perfect example for me was our Parks Department had a series of town hall meetings across the city last fall. And I said to them, I went to the general manager of the Parks Department and I said, how are you advertising? And she said, well, we've got a number of newspapers, we're putting ads in the newspapers, and it's going to be great. And I said, well, it might be great for people over the age of 40, but for people between the ages of 20 and 40, I know lots of people aren't picking up the Scarborough Mirror at that age to flip through and go, look, the Parks Department's having a town hall meeting. I want to go, right? It's Facebook, Twitter, you know, videotape the meeting, put it on YouTube, so you get interested in the next one because they're spaced out over 4 weeks, right? But I said it's great to engage people over the age of 40, but you know, if we're trying to get kids off their butts and, you know, more active and not watching TV and video games, that's how you're going to have to engage them, is social media. It's the 21st century.
Right on. Other comments, Adil?
Yes, I have 2 questions.
Speak up a bit because we're next today.
So I come from a ward that has always a water turnout, right, in all of the city. And I also noticed that every leadership that we have are incumbents, people who've been there for years. And I wonder, do you see, I don't know, maybe for me I saw a connection between the low water turnout and incumbents, because at the end of the day they have maybe a group that they cater to, so long as they come out and are fine. Maybe they don't really care to engage the rest of the community. But have you ever had to deal with chronic apathy, especially from the priority neighborhood? And also I wanted to understand, how did you decide to run for a ward that you didn't live in? And how did you maybe...
What's the logistics of that?
Yeah, like how do you decide that?
Okay. So I guess I'll start with your first comment about the apathy. And you know, and it's all about making those connections. And I think that, you know, I will tell you, in 2006, I was appointed for Ward 41 in the north end of Toronto, and it had very diverse communities, but they were geographically divided, and you could tell which politicians were catering to which areas to get the votes out. And it created an apathy in other areas where people just weren't interested. But, you know, on the flip side, I turned around and I remember saying to my staff, you know, if somebody were to run in this ward for office and engage those different communities, instead of ignoring them and get people interested in politics, you know, combined, if they all supported one candidate, that candidate would get into office. And it's engaging in communities and finding out what their issues are and helping them deal with those issues, where you will get that support, where it will help you get into elected office. And that's, on the flip side, I'm already in office, and I try to treat everybody equally. You know, I know that everybody has their concerns. They might not always, I might not always agree with them, but I think that, you know, everybody deserves to be treated equally and impartially, which is why, you know, my town hall meetings, for example, are on a regular basis throughout the entire ward. You have to engage people, and it goes back to my earlier comments when I started having my town hall meetings. People were like, really? Like, what are you trying to pull? I'm not trying to pull anything. I want to hear what your concerns are. And even Mornell Court, which is right in between 2 priority neighborhoods, Kings Road, Galloway Park, and Mornell, Malvern. And we had a couple of shootings in Mornell, and people just felt they hadn't been listened to. And I was going in there and having a community meeting. We ended up I helped start a community association that has a walk to school club, where they have parent volunteers walk the kids to school in the morning, back and forth at lunch, and walk them back home again at the end of the day. And participation in the local school has actually gone way up. And even the principal used to laugh because they figured what was happening was, you know, single parent families in the community were, they had to go to work, they were looking at their kids and saying, okay, school starts at 9 o'clock, don't be late. No problem, mom or dad, I'll be at school at 9 o'clock. The parent goes out the door and their kid never goes to school. Instead, they're involved in the walking club where they're actually going to school. The same group of parents started a homework club. They're actually using this template. They're going to all the different priority areas in the neighborhood, in 13 priority neighborhoods across the city. But I still had that, it took a while to build up that trust that I just wasn't here for a quick fix and you were never going to see me again. I wanted to make sure that that community was helped because they were right between 2 priority neighborhoods. And when I went to, you know, the social services, they said, well, we can't create another priority neighborhood. We already have 13. If we start another priority neighborhood, it's going to look like we're actually failing in what we're trying to do. And I said, well, who came up with the number 13? Right. And nobody could give me a straight answer. So I ended up working with a community hub in my one in Kings Road, Galloway Oak Park, and staff, you know, to get the resources into that community to make things work. And it's really turned around. But, you know, once again, it was when I started, people were like, oh, you know, here's the city councillor, he's coming in, 2 kids were shot, he's coming in, quick fix, you know, he'll get his media and then we're never going to see him again. And I kept going back, and, you know, I have a great rapport with him, but it takes, you know, the work to build that trust, and I'm not going away anywhere. I'm not interested in a quick fix in the media. It's not why I got there, which kind of leads into your next question of why I decided to run in Ward 43.
And the logistics of it, like what are the rules around elections? I mean, is there, I mean, can you pick any ward to run in? I mean, beyond just the political of obviously having to earn the trust of that community, what's the logistics in terms of the rules?
It's pretty straightforward and simple. As long as you're a resident in the city of Toronto, you can run, I can run in North York. I live in Scarborough, I could run in Etobicoke, North York, East York, York, downtown. I could go downtown and run against Adam Vaughan if I wanted to. You know, even as a sitting councillor, I could say, you know what, I've had fun in Ward 43, I did a great job, I'm going to run in downtown for a change. You know, look out Adam Vaughan or Pam McConnell, or, you know, I could go run against Doug Ford if I wanted to. There's no rule that says I can't, as long as I have a City of Toronto address. You know, one of the I guess issues with it, for example, even in 2010, one of the people that ran against me said that he was the resident of Ward 43, and you know, was the only councillor running in, the person living in Ward 43 running in Ward 43. Well, you know, he grew up in Ward 43, moved downtown with his parents, decided to run in Ward 43, rented an apartment there for 6 months. After the election, it was swearing up and down, I live in Ward 43. You know, 3 months after the election, I was doing my door knocking, and I happened to be going down his street, and I knocked on his door, and somebody came to the door and said, you know, I'd like to talk to so-and-so. I just want to say hi to him. Oh, so-and-so moved out of here 2 months ago. We haven't seen, you know, we got a big stack of mail for him. And I said, well, how long did so-and-so live here? And they said, well, he moved in 4 months before the election, and they left 2 months after the election. And they looked at me and goes, who are you anyway? I said, well, I'm the city councilor. Right? So as long as you have a City of Toronto address, you can run wherever you want. You know, for myself in Ward 43, I grew up in Ward 43. My mom still lives there. The kind of center of the ward is called Kings Road in Galloway. I grew up just south of there. I've seen a lot of changes in the community since. I live about 5 minutes outside of my ward. As I said, my mom's still there. Do all the grocery shopping, church. I'm constantly in my ward. I spend more time in my ward than I probably do the ward that I live in, much to my wife's chagrin and my 3 kids.
But it speaks to how community in Toronto does tend to be mobile. How if you live in the city long enough, you do tend to establish roots that I think make it easy and really quite justifiable to run in a riding that you don't necessarily live in, as long as you're willing to do the work that you've done in terms of communicating and engaging with the community consistently.
Well, so I live in Ward 44 along with 3 other city councillors. And it's interesting because 20 years ago, I remember when I was in the Young Liberals, it was a big thing. If you didn't live in your riding, that, why would you vote for somebody that doesn't live in your riding and you're actually working in Ottawa? I can point to a number of federal and provincial MPs and MPPs that don't live in their ridings. I have, my own case, I've got 3 other councillors in the ward that I happen to live in, which is 50 yards from my own ward. So I don't think it's that big a deal anymore, but it goes back to my earlier comment when I had no candidates meeting with 4 other people running against me, or there was 3 that night, and it came down to a very specific ward issue, and the other 3 couldn't, right?
It's important to have that intel.
Yeah, I think that, you need to, if you're going to run for office, you better darn well understand the area that you want to represent. And because I think if you can't understand the basic issues when you're running for office, I don't think you're going to have that great a level of attachment in solving those issues once you are in office. Did that answer it okay?
Other question? Go ahead.
Councillor, recently you were in the news for a new bylaw that you're putting forth to have property owners and landlords look after vacant properties that have been abandoned or are derelict. Mm-hmm. And we talked a lot about political branding today, and I'm wondering to what extent your work as councillor to create change in the city itself is part of your political branding and part of sort of how you brand yourself to other councillors.
I guess I would.
Maybe you can talk about the genesis of that. That bylaw.
Yeah, and I guess there's a book that I read a few years ago, 6 years ago now, maybe 7 years, by Tip O'Neill, who was the speaker in the States, and it was called All Politics is Local. And I'm a firm believer in that a lot of the things that people want on a local level, you can extrapolate right across the city. And one of those, the licensing committee that I was at a couple of weeks ago, there's 2 different reports that I asked for that eventually I hope will be turned into bylaws. And one deals with brownfield space, they call it, or basically vacant lots, which there's a number in my ward where there was a 7-Eleven at one point, another was a no-name gas station, and they've been torn down. And so I have a vacant lot in the corner of Lawrence and Scarborough Golf Club that's been vacant for 12 years. And right up the road in Ellesmere Park, or Ellesmere and Scarborough Golf Club, I have another one that's been vacant for 12 years that they do a little bit of soil testing every now and again, but basically vacant lots. And they've got cement boulders around them. And as far as I'm concerned, they're an eyesore. So one of the 2 reports I hope will morph into a bylaw is that if you're going to own a piece of property like that, that you have to maintain it. And in using these 2 examples, so instead of having a vacant lot with boulders around it, with concrete rubble, and it's strewn with garbage, and the only way it gets cleaned up is every 3 months I have to call the licensing department, lodge a complaint, and then the process works that they either have the landlord pays to clean it up, or if they refuse enough infraction notices from the city goes in, cleans it up, puts it on their property tax bill. So what this bylaw, my goal with this bylaw instead, is that they have to keep the property pristine all the time. And that would mean, no boulders around the outside of it, no concrete rubble, it has to be grassed over with some benches and, some flower gardens or bushes. So if you're going to spend 10 years trying to sell a piece of property, or you're sitting on it because you're using it as a tax write-off for the rest of your business, well, you're going to have to put some money into it, because I'm not going to play that game anymore. The other bylaw that I requested, it's similar to, we have a policy at the city that if you have a vacant building or a storefront, if it's unrented for a certain amount of time, you got to break on your property taxes, which boggles my mind that, you know, we're here as a municipal government. One of our goals through our Economic Development Committee is to increase business, to attract business into Toronto. And I think that having vacant buildings and you own it and you get a tax break, so once again, you're using it to subsidize another part of your business, I think is irresponsible of business owners. I think it's irresponsible for us as a city to be saying, you know what, thanks for not bringing your business to Toronto. You know, here's your vacant store. I've got one on Lawrence Avenue once again. It was a Canadian Tire store. It's been vacant for 10 years. It's all boarded up. You know, it gets graffiti on it. Canadian Tire, or whoever owns it now, is great. They take the graffiti off. But I think having a vacant, boarded up building or empty storefront in your ward that you're getting a tax break on is not conducive to creating a stronger neighborhood where we're continually going in and saying, clean the garbage up, clean the graffiti, and you know, they're getting a tax break and it's costing us, it's costing everybody in this room, people that are listening, it's your tax dollars hard at work. You're subsidizing a non-existent business. So, yes.
Back to the perennial problem of how do you beat an incumbent when they have the advantages of going door knocking and having the credibility of saying, well, I'm not coming here because I'm your councillor and I'm your government. Is it possible for somebody who's interested in running for council to do door knocking before the campaign starts? And is it possible for somebody who's interested in running for council to set up a table in a mall with some city flyers and engage people in conversation about the different programs that are in the area and getting some input from people in the riding in the ward?
I don't think there's anything against anybody going door knocking. I think to set up a city table and say I'm handing out flyers, that I'm not sure.
I don't mean city flyers so much as I'm representing the city, but information about services that are in the city that might be interesting to the ward or something like that. Like, what are the campaign rules around people? Like, when is it campaigning? Yeah. And when is it, I'm interested in maybe running and I want to know if I might be a good fit for the ward? Yeah. Or do I know what your issues are? Can I represent the people here well?
Yeah. Well, in terms of, so an actual campaigning, so January, I think last time was January 4th, was the date that you could actually start campaigning and knocking on somebody's door and saying, you know, I'm running for city council, you know, here's my brochure, and the other side of it too is you can only raise money to run for office during that, they call it the writ period. So January 4th to October 12th, I forgot the date already. But so basically January to October, you can knock on people's doors and say, I'm running for city council, here's my brochure, or you know, I'm running for city council, please give me $20 or go to my website and you can make a donation online. I don't think, you know, there's nothing preventing you any other time from saying, knocking on somebody's door and saying, well, I'm Paul Ainslie, I want to help make our community a better place. You know, here's a some brochures on city services, or, you know, I think ideally, you know, I'm Paul Ainslie, I want to help make a community a better place. I'm starting a community association, and would you be interested in starting one with me? I mean, that's, if I was going to do it, that's the route I would take, because...
You wouldn't say I'm thinking about running.
You could, but, you know, I think you run into a kind of a catch-22, as I was saying to this young lady earlier, that's, I think, if you came to the door and said, you know what, I'm thinking of running, we don't have lack of services, I'm thinking of running, I think people in their mindset will be, well, that's great, but are you just going to get elected and then disappear? And in some cases, are you just going to disappear like the incumbent that we never see now?
And given the President of the United States, there's a lot of power in the identity of the community organizer as the pre-politician, as someone who is part of the community, who's working for the community, and that gives them a legitimate mandate to be the politician in an era where people tend to distrust politicians But community organizers, they tend to be the legitimate form of that public representative. I think sort of gels very much with the sort of councillor's thoughts on how people would react to you if you said, I want to be a city councillor versus I want to help the community.
Can I ask one more question? How important are political affiliations? Like if I think about myself at different, I would probably be referred to as the mushy middle if I were on council right now, but I like to call it more as the mindful middle. But at any point throughout my life, I've been a member of the PC party, the Liberal Party, and the NDP party, depending on what the big issues are and what I want to support. And some people that I've talked to about, it's kind of that gray area where it's not written in stone that if you're not affiliated with a political party, you're running for city council, like you have to decide where you stand and what party you're going to sit with. And I wanted to know if that's as important as some people have told me it is.
Well, and further, I think, what role do political parties play in City Hall? Because it's clear that they are present, even if it's not officially a party system. But that, given that parties play a role in politics as a whole, it only makes sense that they do play at least a modest role at City Hall. So I'm curious, both in the present and in the prescriptive, what do you see as the role of parties and political affiliation in municipal politics?
I guess, and I just wanted to step back to just, I guess, kind of finish off on your last question. The other interesting thing that I've seen a number of times is that people, they get more involved in their community because they decide that they want to run for public office, and they become, you know, like a community activist, and they get really involved, and they're doing great things, and then they've, you know, said to me, they reach a point where it's like, you know what, I'm much happier being a community activist, and I'm getting things done in my community.
I don't feel
why would I want to run for city council or, you know, federally or provincially? You know, they're working at a hub, a community hub, and they feel that that's the place they want to be. But they started off trying to build a foundation to run for public office, and they found their happy place, and they're a community activist. And you know, I think we need that too. Like I always say when I go to my community association meetings or the East Scarborough storefront, or you know, even people who are community activists, I can't get my job done if I don't have that feedback from my community about what they think the issues are or what their concerns are, because I've had instances where, you know, in my mind I'll go to a community and it's like, this is the issue and this is how I'm going to solve it. And I'll sit down with people and it's like, well, we don't really care about that at all. But over here, this is what we really have a concern about that we need fixed or we need your help with. And I wouldn't have known that without that input from. And then so in terms of party politics, I find it interesting at City Hall, like for myself, I don't belong to any political party. I find it more useful to be I'll say non-politically affiliated. I have an easier time talking with people at the provincial and federal levels because of the other thing at play as well is, like, if you look at the general population, a large part of the population does not belong to any political party either, as opposed to where you go down to the States where everybody seems to identify themselves as a Democrat or a liberal. There's a large part of the population that's non-politically affiliated. They don't even follow politics that often. I've had instances where, you know, people will say to me, you know, how long have you been in Ottawa? Well, I haven't been in Ottawa at all. I'm your city councilor. Oh, okay, well, you know, do you like Stephen Harper? Or, you know, what do you think of Dalton McGuinty? I don't know. I'm your city councilor. I take care of your, you know, this, that, and everything. You know, it seems to have gotten down at City Hall where it's not so much political parties as right versus left, and there's councillors in the middle, and it's gotten, you know, my first job at City Hall, I was there in 1999, and you can see a distinct change in City Hall where in 1999, I could have councillors on the right versus left or in the middle, and they would have a big fight with each other, a big argument, and they'd be yelling at each other, and then they'd go out for drinks or dinner after council. And life would go on, and then they come back the next day and another issue would come up where they would all have to get along with each other. And I've seen an erosion of that in 1999 and until now. Like I still, you know, you get councillors that will cross party and go out to lunch with each other, or you know, they have a hockey pool or a football pool. But there's, you know, after council, it's like a bunch of councillors go out for drinks. You rarely see left versus right, or you know, mushy middle. There's distinct groups of people that go out for drinks. And you know, I sat beside Howard Moscow my first term, and you know, we talked about, you know, just going at it with someone, and then they go out to dinner, and all would be fine. And there's been an erosion of that. And you know, I saw with Mel Lastman, for example, he had 2 staff members, and they went out and they constantly were in councillors' offices checking on things and getting feedback. You know, the first councillor I worked for, you know, the one person was in my office every week. Is there anything you need? How's your boss on these issues? Does the mayor have to call them? You know, if it does, it'll all work itself out. And then David Miller got elected, and I can remember having a conversation with the councillor at the time that I was working with, and you know, David Miller picked all his executive, and there was a bunch of middle councillors, and then there was I'll call it right-leaning councillors. And David Miller seemed to say, you know what, I've got my core of support here. I can get 7 or 8 of the mushy councillors, and then the ones on the right, I'm just going to completely ignore. And then when he was re-elected in 2006, his base councillors, I'll say, that group got larger. The middle got smaller because he looked at people like Sylvia Watson, who lost or didn't run, and Gordon Perks replaced her. So you know, his base got bigger, the middle got smaller. The 12 councillors on the right, 10 or 12 councillors on the right, pretty much stayed out there, I'll say, and they got alienated even more because David Miller had a larger degree of support. And for myself, for example, when it came to land transfer tax and vehicle registration tax, his staff came to me and said, "You'll vote for these." And I said, "Well, no, I'm not going to vote for either one of them because, you know, maybe it's great in City Hall. It's great, not so great out in the east end of Scarborough, where lots of people have to drive. Public transportation, while adequate, isn't as easy as walking out your door and getting on a subway train. So I'm going to get a lot of pushback if I vote for both of those." So at that point, I was basically shut out. There was the mayor's staff didn't come into my office anymore. I was just simply shut out. I was like, you know what, if that's how Mayor Miller's office operates, you know, that's his business. I still work hard in my ward to make sure that I get reelected, and that's how I'm going to do it. And then now you have Mayor Ford, who there still isn't that same crossover between right, middle, and left, or left, middle, right. And I think that, you know, to get municipal politics, you know, the basis of municipal politics is to compromise. And I think he's doing better at it now than he was when he got in. And it'll really needs to be seen how far, if we're going to get back to that, they call it kumbaya moment. But it really, you know, back to Mel Lastman, where you had people on the left running, for example, community services and recreation, or the health committee. You know, I think you really need to get past that right versus left to make City Hall work.
And I think today you've given us a really coherent and a really strong vision of how engagement and community centricity can bring a type of City Hall that is appealing to people in terms of wanting to get involved, wanting to participate, but also effective in terms of the type of city government. And unless there's any final pressing questions, Ed's appearance does indicate that the next session is about to start. So I'll give you one last brief chance to ask the councillor a question.
So just two part, if you can just answer quickly. One, how do you kind of, I guess, well, maybe it's a lot easier for you, but how do councillors balance the pressure of City Hall with the actual needs of the constituents? Because it seems like a lot of time councillors make their decisions at City Hall rather than actually engaging constituents. And the second part is that one great thing you're really doing is trying to engage the community, try to engage everybody into politics. But I guess as you kind of alluded to, like a lot of people getting interested now is because of the mayor. And sometimes with, I guess, like the very decent budget and some other meetings, it seems like some councillors are pretty vocal about their opposition to people coming in and kind of giving their feedback on what's going on. So how, I guess, can we create a specific environment to actually get more productive engagement?
It's a great question, which builds upon your last comments, and I'll use this way to get you to wrap up rather than get me to wrap up. As you say, how can we get more respect at City Hall? How can we get an environment that allows people to feel safe at City Hall from a citizen perspective, rather than feeling that only an idiot would stick their neck out in such an atmosphere?
And I think that's, that's one of the biggest challenges when you look at like a non-issue challenge. It's to get councillors to get over that, antagonistic attitude, because we've had issues in the past couple of months where the outcome was sheerly based on the dislike for the mayor, or the people on right, where the right versus left, their dislike for the other side. And we really need to be moving forward on compromise, using compromise as a basis, and finding that middle ground, whether it's in planning or transportation. From a Scarborough perspective, I can point to public transportation is a perfect example, where we had a whole debate on the TTC and the subway, and the mayor ran on the subways saying, we got to have subways in Scarborough. And one of the comments in City Council was, I think we could all agree, property taxes and development charges are not going to pay for public transit in Toronto, or the level of public transit that we need. And then we need to be looking at all different revenue tools, whether it's road tools or parking lot levies or casino, I'll throw that word out there. All those things got tossed around in the transit debate. And then 2 weeks later, Toronto East York Council decides we don't want any casinos in the downtown core. Well, how can you have a healthy debate over all revenue tools where even before we've had that debate, a quarter of City Council has already stated their position. We don't want any City Council or casinos anywhere in Toronto. Well, I'm not tied to casinos. Maybe they're good, maybe they're bad. I've done some reading on it. But until I can have that debate, I really don't want to make a decision on it. But it makes it harder when you're going into the debate where a quarter of council has already said no. Right? And that's where I don't think we have that healthy debate, where it makes it harder to compromise. But as a council, the only way I think we're going to make Toronto succeed, or get Toronto to succeed on a number of different levels, is to have some type of uniform view and a long-range view. As you were saying, I can't just be looking at Ward 43 and saying what's good in Ward 43 is good for the entire city, because we do get into planning issues where not exactly the best thing for my ward. But if I'm only going to look at issues at City Hall based on Ward 43, the city's not going to grow. And I think we need 44 councillors and mayor to all take that attitude across a wide range of issues, or we're not going to succeed.
Well, I think you've been very generous today, both in terms of your time, but also in terms of your perspective of helping depict a City Hall that is very engaging, that is very enticing towards public participation and towards new blood participating in the political process. So if you give a round of applause.